Stand where the sky thins and listen. The stars do not only shine, they remember. Tonight we go to the edge of the Milky Way, not to count celestial bodies, but to hear what the cosmos has been whispering to the human soul for ages. Prepare to be unsettled and to be transformed. There is a peculiar stillness that gathers at an edge. A shore has a certain hush when the living water reaches land. A cliff enframes a horizon and demands both courage and pause. When we approach the outer rim of our galaxy, the sensation is of an edge not only in space, but also in mind. The threshold is an event. It asks us to alter posture to measure, yes, but also to attend differently. Science hands us exquisite instruments and luminous equations that explain motions and mechanisms. Yet the psychic event that occurs when we stand beneath the band of the Milky Way is not merely a problem for instrumentation. It is a summons to a different competence, one that listens as well as calculates. What does it mean to stand at such a threshold? First, it means acknowledging two domains, the outer domain of facts and the inner domain of meaning. The modern age has excelled at the first. We map orbits, read spectra, simulate galactic physics. Yet mapping the outer world is never merely a technical achievement. It alters the conditions under which we live. A new cosmic map reorients myth, policy, identity. Thus, those who chart stars also change the stories we tell our children. The threshold brings this responsibility into focus. Knowledge gained without reflection becomes an instrument of blunt effect, rather than a possibility for humane action. Second, the threshold requires a posture of double attentiveness. We must be rigorous, vigilant to error, faithful to truth testing. We must also be humble, receptive to the fact that some phenomena call for a kind of listening that does not immediately convert experience into data. There is a poverty in either extreme, in the sterile triumphalism that treats every mystery as a puzzle to be solved, and in the mystic retreat that refuses the testable. The balanced stance honors method while honoring mystery. It says, I will measure, but I will not presume that my measures exhaust meaning. That pledge alone changes how we design experiments, how we train explorers, how we cultivate institutions. Third, the threshold is an initiation. To cross an edge is to be initiated into a new frame of living. Initiation implies rite, and rite implies transformation. Historically, societies accompanied threshold crossing with rites that marked inward change. Fasting, solitude, apprenticeship, because they knew that outer voyages without inner change produce a brittle mastery. The modern explorer may carry different rites: rigorous peer review, ethical review boards, contemplative practices. Yet the function is identical: to transform the person, so that what returns is not merely new data, but newly integrated sight. Fourth, stand at the threshold, and you feel the interplay of awe and anxiety. Awe enlarges attention, anxiety contracts it. The productive tension arranges an oscillation that can be generative if we do not flee from it. The culture that flattens awe into mere spectacle loses depth. Conversely, the culture that frames every unknown as a terror loses aspiration. The task is to cultivate institutions and practices that transform panic into disciplined wonder, training that develops capacity to stay present, to be astonished but not undone. Finally, the threshold is ethical terrain. The sky does not demand only curiosity, it demands responsibility. The discoveries we make at cosmic margins bear implications for life on Earth and perhaps for life beyond Earth. If knowledge influences capacity, then capacity confers obligation. The question at the threshold must always be, to what ends will this power be applied? Answering that question requires not just scientific literacy, but moral imagination, the habit of anticipating consequences, of thinking in longer arcs than the Grant cycle. So the first lesson at the Milky Way's rim is humility born of partnership: partner with the cosmos through careful measurement, and partner with the psyche through disciplined reflection. Where the two meet, new forms of wisdom may be born: practical, humane, and capable of holding the grandeur of both star and soul. To prepare the next generation of explorers, we must teach them instruments and inner practices. We must teach them to listen with both eyes and heart. Only from this stance can the threshold be crossed without violence and with the promise of deeper knowledge. Knowledge that not only knows the cosmos, but is known by it in return. Human beings are not blank slates of perception. We inherit structured ways of seeing metaphors, images, and patterns that give shape to raw sensation. When our ancestors looked up at the Milky Way, they did not only register faint light, they registered story. A band of stars became a river, a path, a spine of myth. These images persisted because symbols serve cognitive and social functions. They compress complexity into manageable images. They carry memory across generations, and they provide a vocabulary for emotions too large for bare description. Symbolic reading of the sky, thus, is an intelligence, not an error. Why does symbolization matter? Because human life is organized in narrative. We do not navigate the world as disembodied calculators. We navigate it as beings embedded in plots and meanings. A city is more than streets. It is a web of promises and betrayals, of friendship and fear. A star is more than fusion. In symbolic life, it is a guide, a warning, a promise. The symbolic sky shapes the ethical and political architectures we live by. A culture that imagines the heavens as a benevolent canopy will orient differently than one that imagines it as indifferent or hostile. Thus, astronomy and cosmology do not simply alter the sciences, they alter the symbolic economy of any society that absorbs them. Symbols are durable because they are adaptive. A symbol can host multiple layers of meaning. Consider a single star that is at once navigation aid, ancestral signpost, and artistic image. In each register, it performs distinct work. The durability of such symbols makes them essential for social continuity. They act as anchors when historical memory is ruptured by catastrophe. Their power lies in their ability to be reinterpreted. They persist precisely because successive generations can unfold them into new contexts, while preserving a thread of continuity. There is risk, of course. Symbolic life can calcify into ideology. When an image hardens into a command, when a guiding star is recoded as an absolute doctrine, its vitality drains away. The antidote is reflexivity, the capacity to re-examine and reimagine symbols in changing contexts. This requires a civic literacy in symbols. Education should not only teach equations, but also how to read images responsibly. Scientists and artists should be in constructive conversation. Discoveries should be translated not only into papers, but into cultural narratives that are responsible and life-supporting. At the personal level, learning to read the sky as symbol cultivates a capacity for inner navigation. When a loss, a crisis, or a moment of awe arises, symbolic competence helps translate raw affect into developmental narrative. A person who can say, "This feels like a dark season before growth," already has a metaphor that orients behavior and fosters hope. In clinical settings, this is not mere poetic comfort. It is therapeutic technique. Symbols enable containment and movement. Finally, star symbolism can be harnessed for moral imagination. If the cosmos is framed not as a resource to be dominated, but as a teacher and partner, then public policy will likely reflect stewardship rather than extractive ambition. The metaphors we choose determine the designs we build. Thus, the work of integrating cosmic discovery with symbolic life is a practical one. It reshapes priorities, institutions, and everyday choices. In short, the sky that speaks to us shapes the world we make. There is a hunger lodged deep in human nature to go farther, to know more, to reconcile inner fracture. The urge to cross the visible horizon and to probe the Milky Way's margins is a cosmic expression of the same inner striving that calls a person to be more truthful, more whole. Individuation, the process by which a person becomes the owner of themselves, integrating shadow and talent, is mirrored in the outward impulse to cross borders. Both movements demand courage, both risk disorientation, and both promise a kind of maturity that is not conquest but reconciliation. Crossing for its own sake risks repeating patterns of exploitation under a new sky. Historically, every exploratory era carried with it the danger of domination. To treat new lands as prizes rather than partners, the modern cosmic imperative must be tempered by a psychology that discerns motive. Is the longing to cross driven by a desire for immortality, to prove mastery, to hide from inner emptiness? Or is it driven by a disciplined curiosity, informed by humility and care? A culture that cultivates reflective desire will channel exploration into practices that honor life and complexity. Individuation and exploration are intertwined in practical life. A mature explorer cultivates skills of inward discernment, the capacity to notice projection, to acknowledge fear turned into rhetoric, to invite integration of what was learned. The mythic model is instructive. The hero ventures, retrieves a boon, and returns transformed. The boon is useful only insofar as it is integrated into the communal field. In the cosmic case, this means discoveries should serve human development, not merely new technologies, but new narratives and practices that expand capacities for cooperation, compassion, and stewardship. We must also cultivate institutional rites that accompany outer voyages. Initiatory practices need not be exotic, they can be ordinary but rigorous. Ethical formation in scientific curricula, rituals of public accountability, interdisciplinary forums that ask big questions about meaning. When institutions support inner work, exploration becomes less likely to replicate destructive patterns. Finally, the longing to cross teaches patience. Cosmic time scales and psychic maturities both demand slow rhythms. The impatience of instant triumph is the enemy of depth. The work of individuation embedded in cosmic desire requires lifelong attention, mentoring, reflective practice, and communal hold. The culture that prizes rushes of novelty over generative maturation will lose the chance to build an exploration ethic capable of sustaining life. In sum, crossing is not a test of technical will but of integrated character. The face of the explorer matters as much as the power of the craft. The deepest creative acts arise not from an abundance of certainty, but from the willingness to dwell in not knowing. The dark field beyond the Milky Way is not an absence, it is a generative ground. Artists have long known that the blank page is opportunity. Scientists are learning that the blank variable space can be an engine of imagination. To cultivate this creative darkness is to practice patience, to revere absent answers, to build protocols that permit the unconscious to work and the imagination to surface its images. Practically, this is a discipline. It begins with tolerance for ambiguity. Our institutions, education, business, governance, often incentivize immediate decisions and quantifiable outputs. Creative darkness requires counter-incentives, time for reflection, practices of slow synthesis, and the cultural valorization of patient inquiry. It requires teams that alternate intense measurement with reflective pauses, laboratories that include spaces for discussion of images and metaphors alongside data review. There is an internal work as well. To live in not knowing without anxiety, one must develop capacities of containment. Meditation, dream work, narrative reflection. These are techniques that train the nervous system to tolerate uncertainty. When these inner disciplines are widespread, the public culture changes. Haste yields to deliberation, panic yields to curiosity. The result is innovation that emerges from integration rather than improvisation. Creativity born of darkness also implies ethical restraint, the temptation to fill voids with aggressive designs. Exploiting new domains for immediate advantage must be checked by community deliberation. The darkest, most fertile fields can be desecrated by untempered power. Thus, practices of stewardship must accompany creative exploration. Finally, welcoming darkness is a recognition of limits and a celebration of possibility. It turns fear into a teacher and vacancy into a laboratory. The Milky Way's edge is an invitation to learn this art, to let the mind be sculpted by questions that resist premature closure, and to allow discoveries to arrive as well, formed gifts rather than forced products. In that patience we find the soil for durable innovation and the moral imagination to use it wisely. At the cosmic rim, archetypes gather like constellations of the soul. The guide, the shadow, the hero, the guardian. These motifs are not merely ancient entertainments, they structure how groups interpret risk and opportunity. When a civilization lifts its eyes to the Milky Way's rim, these archetypes provide models for action. They instruct how to care for discoveries and how to orient collective courage. The cultures that survive with grace are those that have resources for symbol, memory, and ritual. The others repeat cycles of hubris and collapse. Archetypes are practical. They offer scripts for handling fear, grief, triumph. They make complexity navigable. When modern planners and scientists ignore these patterns, they build institutions that lack symbolic anchors, and policy becomes brittle. Conversely, when leaders engage with archetypal imagination, they can design transitions, technological, social, ecological, that are not only effective but soulful. This work asks for collaboration across domains: myth, keepers and scientists, artists and engineers, elders and youth. Such dialogue can fashion myths appropriate for our time. Myths that insist on reciprocity with the cosmos, on stewardship and on humility. In these renewed narratives, the Milky Way is not a resource to be extracted, but a teacher to be listened to, and human ventures become pilgrimages rather than conquests. Archetypes also mobilize ethical attention. They reveal the costs of certain trajectories. A culture enamored with the heroic conqueror archetype will institutionalize dominance. A culture oriented by the wise steward archetype will institutionalize care. The choice is not trivial. It determines the moral grammar of futures we build. Thus, cultivating enriching archetypal life is itself a matter of survival. Journey without return is mere tourism. The true work of exploration is integration, translating outer knowledge into inner transformation and then into social practice. Integration begins with narrative, telling the story of what you have seen in ways that reshape public imagination. It moves into institutions, embedding new measures of success, well-being, symbolic competence, resilience. It culminates in practices that sustain the moral commitments the edge revealed. Integration is difficult because it requires translating rarefied vision into ordinary habits. Ritual helps, as do education reforms that pair scientific literacy with symbolic literacy. It also requires new metrics. GDP alone will not measure a civilization's health. We need indices that account for meaning, civic imagination, and capacity for deep attention. Finally, integration is a moral covenant to future generations. To return from the Milky Way's edge with new sight is to accept responsibility for the worlds we will leave behind. It is to design not only technologies, but practices of care so that curiosity begets wisdom rather than ruin. With steady pacing, allow pauses after evocative lines, and vary tone, soften for reflective passages, rise for moral summons. Use cinematic ambient music under the final lines to let the audience sit with the transformational invitation.